Picture this. You're 32 years old and you just realize that half your productive earning years are probably already behind you. You know, statistically, you've got roughly 40 years of work left, maybe less depending on how things go, and somewhere around that midpoint you crossed into your 30s without really paying attention to what that actually means for your financial future. Most people think your 30s are when you're supposed to have everything figured out. You're supposed to have a stable career, maybe a house, definitely some savings, and ideally a plan for retirement that doesn't involve eating cat food when you're 80. But the reality is, your 30s are where most people actually start building real wealth or spectacularly fail to do so. There's no middle ground, and that's what terrifies people when they really think about it. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, the decisions that derail people in their 30s, and why some people seem to reach financial stability in this decade while others fall further behind despite earning decent money. If you're in your 30s or heading that direction and you want to understand what actually determines whether you'll build real wealth or spend the next 30 years stressed about money, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you see your financial situation differently. Now, before we dive into what makes your 30s such a critical decade for wealth building, let me ask you something. When you think about people who become wealthy, who comes to mind? Maybe you picture someone who made a bunch of money in their 20s with a startup, or inherits money, or just happens to be incredibly lucky with investments. But here's what most people don't realize. The vast majority of people who build meaningful wealth don't do it in dramatic ways. They do it quietly during their 30s and 40s, while everyone else is distracted, complaining about their jobs, and buying stuff they don't need. Your 30s are like the fulcrum of the entire wealth-building seesaw. Get the balance right, and you'll spend the rest of your life watching money work for you instead of working for money. Get it wrong, and you're going to be grinding away until you're way too old to enjoy the freedom that financial independence would give you. Most people think that building wealth requires some kind of special advantage, like maybe you need to work at a tech company, or start a business, or know somebody who knows somebody. But the actual data tells a completely different story. The people who build the most wealth, the consistent millionaires that aren't famous or inherited their money, they're usually just people who made better choices than average during their 30s. They earned decent money, sure, but decent money is available to a lot of people. The difference was in what they did with it. While everyone else was upgrading their lifestyles, they were upgrading their bank accounts. While everyone else was complaining about not having options, they were creating options by building wealth. And the crazy part is, you need to be smarter than average to do this. You just need to be more intentional. Here's something that will probably surprise you. Your 30s are actually the only time in your entire life where you have the perfect combination of earning potential, time for compound interest to work, and still enough years left to course correct if you mess up. Think about it. If you're in your 20s, you probably don't have much income yet. So even if you're saving aggressively, the absolute dollars aren't that impressive. And if you're in your 40s or 50s, you still have earning years left, but you don't have as much time for compound interest to multiply your money. Your 30s, though, that's the sweet spot. You're hopefully making more money than you did in your 20s. You have a decade or more of additional income to build on. And you have 20 or 30 years until retirement, where compound growth can turn moderate savings into serious wealth. Most people completely waste this decade. They're too focused on lifestyle upgrades. They think they need to live like they've finally made it, so they upgrade their apartment, buy a nicer car, eat at better restaurants, and all of that is stealing from their future self. Let me paint a specific picture of what I mean. Imagine two people who both turn 30 years old making the same salary. Let's say $65,000 per year after taxes. They're both starting from zero in terms of retirement savings. They're both just figuring out this whole adult money thing. Person A looks at their new salary and thinks, I made it. I deserve nice things. So they upgrade their car, move to a nicer apartment, start eating out more often. Over the course of their 30s, they save about $300 per month on average, which is roughly $36,000 total. Person B, meanwhile, looks at the same salary and realizes they've got a golden window. They're more intentional about their spending. They keep their car a little longer. They don't upgrade their apartment as dramatically. They save about $800 per month consistently, which adds up to roughly $96,000 over the decade. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's assume both of them invest that money and earn an average return of 7% annually. By the time person A reaches 40, their 36,000 has grown to roughly 45,000. Meanwhile, person B's 96,000 has grown to roughly 130,000. Same starting income, different choices during the same decade, and they're now $85,000 apart. And that gap only gets wider from there because of compound growth. But the math isn't even the most important part of what happens in your 30s. The psychological shift is way more valuable than the dollars. When you start building wealth in your 30s, something flips in your brain. Suddenly you stop seeing yourself as someone who's barely getting by and start seeing yourself as someone who's building something. That identity shift changes every financial decision you make. You start thinking differently about job opportunities. When you don't have savings, you're trapped in whatever job you have. Your boss can be terrible. Your coworkers can be awful. The work can be soul-crushing, but you can't leave because you need that paycheck. But when you're building wealth in your 30s and you've got 6 months of expenses saved up, suddenly you have options. You can ask for a raise because the worst outcome is they say no and you're still fine. You can explore other job opportunities because you're not desperate. You can even take a lower-paying job that's more interesting if it's a better career move long-term. That negotiating power, that ability to take calculated risks, that's what turns people into high earners by their 40s and 50s. Here's something else that changes in your 30s when you get your finances right. You actually get to enjoy your life without guilt. Most people in their 30s are stressed about money constantly. They're eating out at nice restaurants but feeling anxious about it the whole time because they know they shouldn't be spending that money. They're buying things they want, but feeling guilty instead of enjoying them. They're stressed about their future, but too overwhelmed to do anything about it. But when you're actually building wealth, when you've got a system in place, when you know exactly how much you can spend guilt-free because you've already allocated money towards savings and investments, suddenly your life becomes less stressful. You can go out to dinner and actually enjoy the food instead of mentally calculating whether you can afford it. You can buy something you want without that nagging anxiety about whether you're making a mistake. It's not that you're suddenly rich, it's that you have permission to enjoy life because you've already handled the important stuff. Now, here's what most people get completely wrong about wealth building in your 30s. They think it requires some kind of extreme sacrifice, like they're gonna have to eat ramen noodles and never go anywhere fun and basically live like a hermit for 10 years, so that maybe hopefully they'll have some money when they're 40. But that's not actually how it works. You don't need to live a miserable life to build wealth in your 30s. You need to make intentional choices about where your money goes. Maybe instead of buying a brand new car, you buy a reliable used car. Not because you hate nice things, but because you understand what that car is actually costing you in opportunity cost. A new car loses thousands in value the moment you drive it off the lot. That money could have been in investments, growing and multiplying. Over 30 years, assuming an 8% return, every $10,000 you keep out of a new car purchase and put into investments grows into over $100,000. So that $30,000 car decision isn't really a $30,000 decision. It's actually a $300,000 decision when you think about the opportunity cost. Or maybe instead of upgrading to a fancy apartment, you stay where you are a couple more years or move somewhere cheaper, understanding that you're trading a short-term lifestyle upgrade for long-term financial freedom. I know someone who's making $100,000 a year in their mid-30s, but they still live in a modest 2-bedroom apartment that costs $1,500 a month. Everyone around them is upgrading to fancy places, and they get teased about it sometimes. But while everyone else is spending half their income on housing, this person is building wealth. By the time their peers are 45 and stressed about money, this person is going to have complete financial freedom. That's the difference one decision makes. Not a life-altering decision, just a decision to stay with the apartment a bit longer while everyone else moves on. The thing is, most people are actually spending way more than they realize anyway. They're just not tracking where it's going. They'll spend $300 a month on coffee, eating out, and random subscription services they forgot about. They'll drop $200 on clothes they don't really need, another $100 on entertainment. And they're not even aware they're doing it because none of these purchases feel significant on their own. But when you're 30 and you suddenly realize that you're spending $500 a month on stuff that doesn't actually bring lasting value to your life, that's when you start making different choices. And you don't have to cut all of that out completely. You just have to be intentional about it. Here's something else that derails people in their 30s. Comparison. You're scrolling through social media and you see someone your age who just bought a house. Someone else is taking an expensive vacation. Another person is buying a brand new car. And suddenly you feel behind. You feel like you should be doing those things too. And that FOMO, that fear of missing out, makes you make terrible financial decisions. You buy the house you can't really afford, or you spend money on the vacation you can't really spare, just so you can keep up with people on Instagram. But here's what you don't see on social media. You don't see that the person who bought the house is stressed about the mortgage. You don't see that the person on vacation put it on a credit card and is now paying interest on it. You don't see the debt and stress that often comes with looking wealthy on social media. This is why understanding your own numbers is so important. When you know exactly where you stand financially, when you have a plan, other people's choices stop affecting you as much. You're building according to your plan, not according to what looks good on Instagram. Here's where housing costs become super critical in your 30s, and this is something I see derail people constantly. In your 20s, you might have lived with roommates or in a small apartment or even at home. It was fine because you were young and you didn't feel the need to have your own space. But somewhere around 30, people start thinking they deserve their own place. They upgrade to a nice 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment, or they decide it's time to buy a house because, that's what you're supposed to do in your 30s. And boom, suddenly housing costs take up 40, 50, sometimes even 60% of their income. When housing takes that much of your income, everything else becomes impossible. You can't save meaningfully. You can't invest. You can't take risks. You're just trapped paying rent or a mortgage. This is probably the single biggest factor that determines whether people build wealth or stay stuck. I'll give you a concrete example. I know two people who both turned 30 around the same time, both making decent money, around $70,000 a year. Person A decided they were done with apartments and wanted to own. They bought a condo for $400,000. With taxes, insurance, maintenance, and the mortgage payment, their housing costs became about $2,400 a month. That's 41% of their gross income. Person B stayed in a rented apartment that cost $950 a month. That's about 16% of their gross income. Now let's say both people saved the money they had left over. Person A might save $400 a month if they're lucky. Person B saves over $2,000 a month. Over 10 years, that's a difference of almost $200,000. And this isn't even accounting for investment returns. Just the raw savings difference is massive. And here's the painful part. Person A has the house, so they feel like they're winning. They feel more successful, more adult, more accomplished. But person B is quietly building wealth while person A is trapped in a house payment. By the time they're 40, person B's investments are starting to compound seriously. They have options. They can retire early if they want. They can start a business. They can take risks. Person A is still trapped in their house payment. The truth is, if you want to build real wealth in your 30s, your housing needs to stay under 30% of your gross income. I know that sounds crazy if you live in a major city. Maybe you're in San Francisco or New York or some other place where 30% of gross income won't even get you a decent apartment. In that case, you have a choice. You can either accept that you're going to struggle financially in that city, or you can move somewhere else. And I know that sounds harsh, but it's true. You can't build wealth paying 70% of your income in housing costs. It's mathematically impossible. The people in your 30s who are quietly building wealth while everyone else complains about money, they're either in lower cost of living areas or they've made a conscious decision to live below their means on housing. Now, here's something that nobody talks about but everyone experiences in their 30s. Relationship dynamics around money. If you're in a relationship, this becomes critical. A lot of relationships fail because couples have completely different financial mindsets. One person is trying to build wealth and the other person is trying to spend everything. They fight about money constantly. One person feels like they're being denied enjoyment of life. The other person feels like they're going to be broke. This stuff tears relationships apart. But when you're in a relationship and you're both aligned on financial goals, when you're both building wealth together, suddenly you're a team. You're working towards something meaningful together. And that actually brings you closer instead of pushing you apart. If you're in your 30s and you're in a relationship, but you haven't had a serious conversation with your partner about your financial goals, that's probably your next step, because this stuff matters way more than most people realize. And here's what's interesting. In relationships where both partners are building wealth, there's this shared sense of progress and momentum. You're not fighting about money because you're both clear on the plan. You both know that the temporary sacrifice now is going to create options and freedom later. That shared purpose is powerful. It brings couples together. Compare that to relationships where there's financial stress and conflict all the time. People are resentful, anxious, and constantly frustrated. The wealth-building couples are happier, less stressed, and more connected. So in your 30s, if you're in a relationship, getting on the same financial page isn't just good for your money. It's good for your entire relationship. Here's something else that happens in your 30s that most people don't see coming. Your career trajectory really starts to matter. In your 20s, you might have been jumping between jobs, figuring out what you wanted to do, maybe going back to school, but in your 30s, those early career decisions start to compound. If you spent your 20s just taking whatever job paid the bills and not investing in skills or expertise, well, by 35, you're probably still in entry-level positions making entry-level money. But if you spent your 20s strategically building skills, networking, taking on challenging projects, by your 30s, you're hitting that point where you're starting to command real income. And the gap between someone who was intentional about their career and someone who just drifted becomes massive. This is when all those early investments in yourself start paying off. And I don't just mean formal education. I mean the online courses you took, the skills you developed, the people you networked with, all of that compounds. But, here's the thing that most people don't realize about their 30s and career. This is the decade where you actually have leverage. You've got enough experience that you're valuable. But you're not so far along that you're locked into your current role. You can still make big moves. You can still switch careers or industries if you want to. You can start a side business. You can negotiate for better positions. But most people waste this leverage. They get comfortable. They stop learning. They stop taking on challenging projects. And then by the time they're 45 and they realize they hate what they're doing, it's way harder to change. Your 30s are the last best time to pivot if you need to. After that, it gets progressively harder. Let me tell you something that might be uncomfortable to hear. The reason most people don't build wealth in their 30s isn't because they don't earn enough. It's because they're waiting for something. They're waiting for their next raise before they start saving. They're waiting to feel more confident before they start investing. They're waiting until they've paid off their old debts before they start building new wealth. They're waiting for the right time. And, spoiler alert, the right time never comes. There's always something else that needs to happen first. The psychology of waiting is that it feels safer than actually taking action. If you're waiting, you're not failing. You're just not starting yet. But while you're waiting, you're losing money to compound growth. Every year you wait to start investing is a year of returns you never get to capture. Now, let's talk about something that terrifies people in their 30s but shouldn't if you've been paying attention. Recessions and market downturns. In your 30s, if you're investing consistently, you're going to experience at least one significant market decline, maybe even 2 or 3. And most people freak out. They see their investments drop 20 or 30%, and they panic. They sell everything at a loss, locking in their losses. They stop contributing because they think it's a bad time to invest. And boom, they've just made a terrible financial decision that's going to cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. But if you understand how compound interest works, if you're investing in index funds, downturns are actually amazing. When prices are down, your regular contributions buy more shares. When the market recovers, which it always does historically, those extra shares you picked up at lower prices are incredibly valuable. The people who get rich are the ones who keep investing through the downturns, not the ones who panic and sell. I saw this play out during the 2020 market crash. A lot of people in their 30s panicked and sold. They locked in losses that they're still dealing with now. But the people who kept investing, who actually increased their contributions because everything was on sale, they're sitting pretty. Their investments recovered and then some. And they picked up shares at fire sale prices that are worth way more now. The difference between panic and perspective is going to be hundreds of thousands of dollars by the time they retire. This is why having an emergency fund separate from your investments is so critical. If you have 3 to 6 months of expenses sitting in a savings account, you don't have to panic when the market drops. You know you can cover emergencies without touching your investments. You can stay calm and keep investing while everything is cheap. Here's something that makes me genuinely sad. I know people who are in their mid-30s and they've just figured out that they're not saving for retirement at all. Like they've been working for a decade or more and they have almost nothing set aside for when they're old. They usually had some vague idea that they should probably do something about it, but they never got around to it because they were focused on short-term stuff. And then they hit 38 or 39 and they panic. They try to save aggressively to catch up, but now they're behind on compound growth and they're stressed constantly. If you're in your 30s and you haven't started saving for retirement yet, that's actually your most urgent priority. Not buying a house, not taking a vacation, not upgrading your car. Seriously, every month you wait is costing you tens of thousands of dollars in lost compound growth. But here's what's beautiful about the power of small, consistent actions in your 30s. If you start with just $100 a month toward investments and you earn a modest 7% return annually, by the time you're 65, you'll have over $500,000, $500,000. From $100 a month, that's the power of time and compound interest working together. Most people look at that and think it's impossible, but it's not. It's just math. And the math works the same way regardless of who you are or how much you earn. The only requirement is that you actually start and that you stay consistent. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to be some financial genius. You just have to be consistent. The thing about your 30s is that you still have enough time to recover from mistakes. If you mess up your finances at 30, you've got 20 or 30 years to get it right again. But with every year that passes, that window closes. By the time you're 40, you've only got 25 years. By 50, you've got 15. And if you don't get serious about it until your 50s, it's basically too late. You're never going to have enough time for compound interest to do the heavy lifting. You're going to have to work longer and save way more aggressively. Your 30s are when you need to make the decision. Are you going to build wealth, or are you going to spend your 60s and 70s working because you didn't take action in your 30s? That's not theory. That's mathematics. So what should you actually do if you're in your 30s and you're just now realizing that you need to get serious about your finances? First, figure out exactly where you stand. Calculate your net worth. Add up everything you own and subtract everything you owe. If you're at 0 or negative, don't panic. You're not alone, but you need to know the actual number so you can track progress. This is like getting on the scale when you're trying to lose weight. It might be scary, but you can't fix a problem you don't understand. Second, get clear on your income and expenses. How much are you actually making after taxes? How much are you actually spending? Most people are shocked when they face these numbers because they've never actually looked at them directly. Take the last 3 months of bank statements and credit card bills. Add up every single dollar you spent. That's your burn rate. That's the baseline. From there, you can make intentional decisions. Third, set up automatic transfers for savings and investing. Don't rely on willpower. Set it up so that money moves to savings and investments automatically before you even see it. If your paycheck goes directly into a checking account and then automatically moves $100 to savings, you never get a chance to spend it. You never have to make the choice every week. It just happens. This is the difference between people who build wealth and people who intend to build wealth. Fourth, commit to not increasing your lifestyle expenses when you get a raise. This is the mistake everyone makes. They get a raise and they immediately spend it on a nicer apartment or a better car. But if you take even half of any raise and put it toward wealth building, you'll be amazed at how fast things compound. A $2,000 raise means an extra $1,000 per year towards savings if you split the difference. That's probably enough to add $50,000 to your net worth over a decade when you factor in investment returns. Fifth, if you have debt, create a plan to pay it off. Not aggressively, just intentionally. Figure out which debts have the highest interest rates and make a plan to eliminate them. High-interest credit card debt is a wealth killer in your 30s. You're literally transferring money from your future self to credit card companies. If you can eliminate that stuff in your 30s, you free up so much money for actual wealth building starting in your 40s. Sixth, educate yourself just enough that you understand the basics. You don't need to become an expert investor. You don't need to read 50 books about personal finance. But you do need to understand compound interest, diversification, and the power of starting early. Spend a few hours reading or watching videos. Get the fundamental concepts, then start actually implementing instead of endlessly researching. And here's something that might sound dark, but it's real. If you reach 45 without having built any wealth, without having established any investments, without having been intentional about money, it gets dramatically harder to catch up. You can't make up for lost time with investment returns because you don't have enough time anymore. You'd have to save aggressively, work longer, or accept that you're going to have a difficult retirement. I say this not to scare you, but to motivate you. Your 30s are the sweet spot. You've got time. You've got earning potential. You've got enough years left for compound growth to actually work in your favor. Don't waste it. I know that sounds heavy, but it's true. Here's something else that nobody talks about. The lifestyle creep is real. In your 30s, if you're not intentional, every single year you'll find yourself spending slightly more. A nicer apartment here, a better car there, eating out a few more times per month, upgrading to the premium version of things, and none of it feels like a big deal individually, but collectively it adds up to thousands and thousands of dollars per year that's not going toward your future. This is called lifestyle inflation, and it's one of the biggest wealth killers in your 30s. The people who stay ahead financially are the ones who make a conscious decision not to increase their spending as their income increases. They're not being cheap or depriving themselves. They're just not playing the game of constantly upgrading their life to match their income. And, here's the real truth that nobody wants to hear. Your 30s are when you decide what your life is going to look like. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, boring, mathematical way. The daily choices you make about your money in your 30s are going to determine whether you're working until you're 70 or whether you have the option to step back in your 60s or even earlier. Whether you're stressed about money constantly or whether you have the freedom to make choices based on what you want instead of what you need. Whether you're dependent on your job or whether you have options, whether you're helping your kids out financially or whether they're helping you out, most people don't think about it that way. They think their 30s are just about making more money than they did in their 20s and maybe buying a house. But the reality is so much bigger than that. Your 30s are about building the foundation for the rest of your life. And that foundation is either going to be solid and secure or it's going to be shaky and fragile depending on the choices you make starting right now. The person you become while building wealth in your 30s is way more valuable than the money itself. Start small, stay consistent, and remember that the next 30 years are going to feel like they fly by. Make sure you're building something meaningful during them.